Thank you. My name is Mark Daly. I work with ESB, and in particular, I'm in the electric vehicle side of ESB, section named ESB eCars. And most of my work involves the various European projects that we're involved in looking at electric vehicles and how they operate and people's acceptance of them. However, part of the story with electric vehicles is how they're going to impact on our grid. And Professor Monti gave a bit of a background as to what is likely to happen there. And I just wanted to give a similar story, but from the point of view of a utility and where we stand. So a little bit of that story is basically looking at who we are. So ESB are the Electricity Supply Board. And we've had some changes in our time. So back in 1927, we were founded, and we were the one and only electricity company. We were founded to operate a hydro station called Ardnacrusha. Now, just to put it into perspective, at the time it was felt that Ardnacrusha would look at all the energy needs for Ireland and for the foreseeable future. Whereas now it really looks at about 2% and even possibly slightly less of our total demand. So things have changed. A next kind of milestone, I suppose, and there's been various power stations built. We had electrification of cities and towns around the country. And the next big milestone back in 1946, where we started moving out into the countryside and bringing energy to people in quite remote areas. When I move on, the next big milestone for us was 68, I'd say, is Turlock Hill. And the reason I've pulled this one out is Turlock Hill was built in response to a recognition that at night there was a lot of capacity that was just being wasted or not used. So we went for a hydro storage station, which pumped up water at those times during the night when we had surplus power and used it for peak periods. So this was the first almost demand response steps that we would have made. So jump on and get a little bit closer to where we are now. In 2006, the Commission for Energy Regulation looked at the split of the electricity system, and we have a company in Ireland called EirGrid who would look after the operation of the transmission system. And a lot of the rest of the system within ESB has meant that we're now a vertically integrated utility. So we still own the transmission system assets, however we don't operate them. We're involved in the power generation side. We're involved in the networks on a DSO level, so distribution system is owned and operated by ESB. And then we have ESB Innovation, which includes our international wing, ocean energies, fibre to the building, and electric vehicles, where I come from. And then you'll notice a slightly different form of the name, and that is our customer supply, which is Electric Ireland. So, just old-fashioned energy. I mean, what we were used to dealing with when we were one company and we had complete control, we'd be single supplier for the consumer, and most people were on a single rate. Daytime, nighttime didn't make a difference. We got to the stage then where some of our customers, a good number of customers, went on night tariffs for the likes of storage heating. So that was the first bit of a change, and we started to see levels of demand side, or at least we'll say conscious change of when you're going to use your energy. And the next thing we had was each customer had an electricity meter, and very importantly, and you'll find out a little bit in a minute, that meter didn't move. It stayed in the same place all the time. Just on a very quick snapshot on it, when we look at generation side, it also went through changes. We had the old buttons and dials form of power station control, and that's moved on now to the even Windows-based. At one stage, we wouldn't go beyond Unix because we didn't trust Windows as a platform to run a power station. Nowadays, we even use Windows there. But we've become far more connected within the power stations, both internally, where you have all the graphic displays and they're all interconnected very nicely, and externally, where that goes back out to other remote areas. and in particular where we look at the information management behind a power station. So, consumer trends. In Ireland, we've been down a route of smart meters, discovering what benefits they might have for us, where we might go, and we're in the stages, kind of middle stages of a smart meter scheme. So we've been through the pilots, we've discovered what the advantages are and what we'd like to do, and we're now getting ready for a wider deployment of smart meters across the country. And of course, with smart meters, that comes the time of day tariffs. So it's no longer going to be nighttime and daytime. And I say this is when it's fully rolled out. It will be various times a day or times of week. So your Saturday usage and your Sunday usage might be different to what you do during the week. And effectively where that's going to go in the future is towards a far more dynamic pricing structure and something that's down to a matter of hour to minutes. The other thing that's on the consumer trends is we have the home generation side. So whether that's solar or wind, we have people generating energy themselves, using that energy, in some cases feeding that back to the grid as well. So it's changing the whole dynamic of how our energy system is working. And then I mentioned the static meter. Well, electric vehicles. We have electric vehicles coming out. They're beginning to make headway and be accepted by people. What it means for us are we have a couple of different elements to it. The first is the fact that I mentioned a single meter. Well, now people are using energy in many different places, but that may need or does need to be associated back to one account. The second side of it is those electric vehicles, we don't know who's going to buy and where, and it impacts on how much we need to invest on our network as well in order to be ready for these extra additional loads where they may appear. So again, just on a short note on the generation side of it, again you have multiple suppliers. So it's not just one generation company providing all the energy for the island of Ireland. And that's the same across Europe. You have distributed generation where a lot more small generation becoming available around the country. And that has connection issues as well from the infrastructure side. And these are based, a lot of them, on renewable sources. So you've got the wind farms. I put solar in there because I'm trying to give the European view of it. Solar so far in Ireland has been relatively slow, but as costs change, that's also likely to change how we look at it. And then the one big thing with the renewables is the weather variability. So again, comes into the control aspects of how we use energy, how it's generated, and how we can best balance the use of renewables. So when I look at the challenges that are out there that ICT needs to start looking at solutions to, we've the environmental heading, and with environmental we need to get the maximum out of the renewables. And I show a graph here which you see a little red line up at the peak kind of later on in the day, and what that graph is trying to do is see where our potential to take away some of the peak usage and shift it to off-peak times. And what's here is not even a particularly enthusiastic or particularly adventurous plot. It's small peak changes. But essentially, if we could, we would go as close as we can to a flat line where generation and demand are even across the full 24-hour period in a day. Not likely to happen in its full form, but we can certainly move towards it. And if we can do that, we can curtail the need for heavy infrastructure investment. Again, one of the topics that Professor Monti referred to earlier on. From a consumer point of view, and from a business point of view, from a utility, we look at, okay, we need to offer services and tariff packages in line with time of day usage. We now need to compete far more. There are other energy providers out there. Everyone needs to offer something that's attractive to their customers and gain new customers along the way. So consumers are going to be looking at this, they're going to want these tariffs, and on the other side of it, from a consumer's perspective, we need to be able to track, as I said, the mobile use of energy. So when it comes to electric vehicles, we need to put good packages together that can show where they're using energy, how they're using it, present it to them in a way that they fully understand and they don't believe that they're in any way being overcharged. It's nice and transparent for them. When I look at the challenges from a network perspective, it's access to a wide array of condition data from electrical networks. We have our charge points that are in the ground for electric vehicles. We have our overhead lines for transmission and distribution system, where we have potential for a lot of data coming back. The challenge is to be able to send high-speed data in a secure method for control commands, and then to reduce the interruption times on the network as well and achieve the self-healing. So effectively what we have here, again, when we're working from a DSO perspective, from a distribution system operator perspective, and we're looking at the network, we must produce a quality of service. And that means if we have interruptions through storm damage or whatever else, that this is brought back as quick as we possibly can. And in some cases, we may be able to do that automatically and then go back out, repair the line, and bring it back into full service. And it's by manipulation of other networks in the area and how you can use those. And then finally, on the challenges side of it, from an economic side of it, again, mentioned a couple of times already, which is the investment. We need to try and defer that investment and reduce it as much as we can. And if we can use renewables and if we can be far smarter about how we use our energy on the system, we can look at reducing the dependency on imported fuels as well. So in order to make a lot of this work, and this is a slide I've taken from some of my networks colleagues, we've got all of these players. These 5 rings here show the renewables, the networks, the metering, the home, and the generation and the electric vehicles aspect. We now have energy flowing more than just one way out of a generator and into a home. It's flowing 2 ways. Information must follow that. The infrastructure must be available and able to take that. And really, to make that work, you're into the future internet, you're into the ICT solutions. And they need to go across all different aspects. So there's a huge area that can be picked from in the future internet in the energy sector. So ICT and telecoms being part of our solution, we've looked in a couple of projects underneath the future internet. We were involved in FinCENI originally, and the FinCENI project looked at what are these use cases likely to be and scoping them out. And then that in turn led on to a phase 2 project called FINESC. And for FINESC, ESB's main input was in Work Package 5, and Work Package 5 has 2 main streams. So the first stream was very much on the electric vehicle infrastructure. What we've looked at doing is we've started to build a network, or we've built a network which looks at 2 main trial areas, one of them being in Galway on the west coast of Ireland, where we have 4G WiMAX infrastructure in place, very much under ESB's control, and we're looking at using this to evaluate how our control works using generic enablers. And the second main area is an LTE based 4G technology, and that's down the southeast of Ireland around the Waterford-Wexford area. So we'll be able to compare the ESB-controlled 4G solution as against a 4G solution that's not totally within ESB's control. And we will look at how we can manipulate the loads and the speeds at which we can react. So we need to control the charge of an electric vehicle in the form of an aggregator. So it's no longer just somebody comes in, plugs in their vehicle and does totally what they want. We use the aggregator role to do that. In order to do that efficiently, we need to communicate with our DSO or network operator. And I'm almost conscious that when I mention network operator, I'm talking electrical systems, not data and telecommunications. So we need to communicate with our DSO and see what it is needed when, how we can best facilitate that. So in doing this in Stream 1 of Work Package 5, we are looking at the generic enablers, in particular the likes of security and anonymization of data, all the different things that we would need to achieve in order to make this work in reality, in real life. So we have a fantastic opportunity here to trial the generic enablers in a reasonably controlled manner and to be able to move forward then towards larger scale implementation in the future. And we will also assess the reaction speed. So I mentioned LTE, I mentioned the WiMAX. We will use 3G and GPRS options as well. And we will just see, okay, how fast can we actually control these loads? What is the value to the network operator of that? Because if we can't control them with speed, we very much reduce the potential impact on the network. We also want to understand how to make the specific enablers behind the EV control more generic. So every time we have a slightly new variation on something we want to do, we want to look at this and say, well, okay, we don't want to go back and reinvent the wheel each time. So even the domain-specific enablers that we're using, we want to move those in and just round them off and make them more one-size-fits-all. Now, the other part of it, and this is a big part of it, and again, Professor Monti looked at the amount of data that's been handled here and how this would go up. He looked very much from the point of view of the households, but he mentioned the networks as well. We've potential for quite sizable amounts of data to be moving. Some of this is not particularly time dependent. It can be out in 15-minute packets, whatever it happens to be, so we can move some way slowly. On the other hand, some of it is actually high-speed critical. So we want to see, well, what is the upscaling effect, how may that work? And that's part of what we want to do within Stream 1. We have a second leg within the Work Package 5, and that's our Stream 2 activities, which is inter-substation. And we want to see if we want to go out and start controlling, and again, take electric vehicles as the load. And I can never stress enough, this is about electric vehicles for me, but it's also about smart buildings and all the other potential loads. But if we need to look at communication between substations from a microgrid and a smart grid perspective, we want to also make sure that we can get that slow data out regularly. That's relatively straightforward. And then the high-speed data as well, which is for control purposes. So we will look at looking with the 61850 standards and looking at the older technologies, legacy technologies, for updating them. To do that, I'm just going to move on because of time, we have our generic enabler-based utility applications. We have the layer then from the substation, and then we have that which connects to the optical communication layer. So again, we'll pilot the use of high-speed optical communications for control purposes. We'll use the security generic enablers. That's the main one we're going to use here. We'll look at that two-tiered approach where we have private networks and public networks. So our consumer end smart energy can still work on our mobile phone through public internet. But on the other hand, we might want to use a lot of the same generic enablers on a private network. And that all pulls into the quality of service side of it, which we had mentioned from the point of view of our duty as a DSO. So energy, and this is the last slide up, you'll be glad to know. Energy and SMEs. In order for the SMEs to come in here, we need to put in some level of kind of control which allows us to allow them into the system and at the same time give us security that it's not going to interrupt our system too much. So we've developed the API layer through Finesque, and we have also got a mediation layer which basically looks at just connecting the right applications to the right end data. And that's going to be very important towards the acceptance of SME APIs in the energy sector. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.